Thanks for coming out on such a snowy night. I hope your drive wasn't too terribly bad. First off, I just want to get a roll call of the folks that are on the phone, just so that we know that we have with us. So if you wouldn't mind just doing a quick introduction of who's on the phone tonight, we appreciate it.
Hi, this is Elizabeth Fitzgerald, South Burlington, and I'm going to be on till
now in the conference.
I got Elizabeth.
Heather McMillan.
I got Heather and Amy
And Kim.
and Kim. Anyone else on the call? All right, perfect. So why don't we get things running here? And we have some esteemed guests with us tonight, Gio not included.
I agree with you that typically there are very few AAA certified arbitrators in Vermont, but there are, for example, very qualified economists. We used Art Wolf, just use a name, as a witness. We might have preferred, given the fact that Mr. McCausland, the arbitrator, was also an economist, to have Mr. Wolf be able to participate in the deliberative sessions. That's sort of our thinking. But I certainly understand your point.
Thank you.
I'm willing to take one question. It's got to be a softball question.
What's the Kevin, Amy, Orleans North representative, what's the likelihood of, do you see, of implementation by 1/21?
Implementation, I think implementation is going to happen. We've gone through the statutory process, we've gotten a result. I think it's a mandate. And I don't think I think the legislature's attention is probably a question better asked to Senator Baruth, but my thinking is that the legislature typically doesn't look backwards, it would look forward. So we're anticipating implementation and then judging what the impacts are and going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, not just for tonight, but all of the commissioners. I mean, this was a heavy lift. You guys spent a lot of time on this, not just doing the negotiations, but all the prep work behind it and everything like that. So I'm very grateful for the work that you all did on behalf of school boards across the state. So thank you very much for this work. We will figure out a good way to digest the information that Joe shared with us tonight and then get some feedback on that as well.
We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. I'm gonna transition.
You're gonna kick us out.
I didn't say that. But yeah, we want to make sure that we have Senator Baruth with us this evening. We want to make sure that we give him all the time that we had originally allotted for us, so no pun intended, but we will eat into our dinner hour a little, or dinner half hour a little bit, in order to make sure that Senator Baruth gets all the time that he was promised. So, all right. Yeah, if you guys want to stay, you're
Yeah,
welcome.
when they sit to the side. Listen to the esteemed senator for a little bit.
Yeah.
No, and indeed you should stay because our new caterer is very good.
Have some board members who couldn't make it, so there's plenty of food.
All right.
Well, yeah,
This
well,
is
thanks for
gonna work
listening.
out perfectly.
Hello, hey, how's it going?
I like how we separated to put him in the hot seat.
No.
If the legislature would leave us alone as school board members,
Well,
that'd be just great.
that's number one on the agenda.
Oh, boy.
That's
quite the start.
And things are going well.
So by way of introduction, said his name several times now. We have Senator Baruth with us this meeting, chair of Senate Ed Committee. We just wanted to take the time mainly to hear from you, to hear what, Senate Ed's priorities and thoughts and priorities are for the upcoming session.
Yep.
but also give you an opportunity to meet this. I will say, the VSBA organization has changed a bit over the past year. Not only do we have a new executive director, we also have new staff. But by and large, there are several new board members here as well, representing districts from all across the state. If you don't mind, I'll just do a quick go around on the table here so folks can just let us know who you are and what region you're from.
Mark Clough from Peacham.
Kevin Amiot, Orleans North.
Colleen McKinnon, Chittenden, Grand Isle.
George Gondu, Well Springs.
Tara Street, Franklin.
Sue Siglowski, Executive Director.
Neil Odell, president of the VSBA, and also representing, Norwich, Hanover, and the Windsor area.
Adrian Raymond, Mill River Unified Union District.
Jim Salzgiver, Bennington region.
David Chandler, also Bennington region.
Nancy Russell, Windsor.
Lori Childers, Addison County.
Susan Holson, VSBA staff.
Mark Nielsen, Wall North. Don Collins, Franklin.
Kevin Hansen, Addison.
I'm one of the commissioners.
Yes.
Well, as was said, I'm Phil Baruth from Chittenden County, currently chair of Senate Ed, and I've been on that committee for 10 years now. I served with Don on that committee, so to go to Don's point first, which was leave us alone.
I'm gonna get thrown out of the room by everybody else.
What I would say is over those 10 years, there have been a lot of systemic changes. We're probably as tired as you are. So Kate Webb, who chairs the House Committee, and myself, both independently without checking with each other, gave almost a word-for-word answer when asked by a Vermont Digger reporter what our priorities were. And the first one was to give you all a chance to digest what we've done, to go back, check our work. That's what we were engaged in today with Gio and Joe and the other commissioners who came in to talk about statewide healthcare bargaining. Not to do anything crazy with it, but to fix it, to make it better, less friction, make it more equitable, make the outcomes better for districts, better for students, better for teachers. So we're also going to be engaged with that in other areas. So Act 173, we're going to be tinkering with every session for the next, I want to say 10 years. It's probably going to be every year an Act 173 bill or set of changes. So that's number one. The only place where I would put an asterisk there is pre-K. So in the split that the House and the Senate have done, we're not going to be looking at pre-K unless the House sends us a bill. But the House has indicated it's their number one priority to primarily try to get rid of the dual oversight of AHS and AOE and everything that that implies. So, you know, from dual licensing, dual oversight, dual fees, etc. But also trying to look at the mixed delivery system we have now, which the report we got back suggested that that wasn't working too bad in terms of providing coverage around the state, although there are some childcare deserts where you don't have a lot of pre-K. But people who are private providers are finding their business models very difficult to make work. They feel disadvantaged relative to public providers. Public providers, I think by and large, wish that the system would more coherently just operate around public school pre-K. So we're going to be engaged with that potentially if the House votes out a bill which, you know, out of the last 3 or 4 years, their big bills, only one of them has made it out. So they, oftentimes their big bills run aground in their different money committees. So that's what we're not going to do. We are going to, my committee is looking very seriously at putting together a program a very, very stripped down version of something that Tennessee does, which is a promise scholarship to try to bridge the gap between our fantastic graduation rate and our incredibly embarrassing rate of students who go on to college. So I believe a big, big part of that is that our state college system is relatively very expensive to the rest of the country. So for a couple of years now, my committee's been working on, is there a way for us to provide a limited tuition benefit to graduated seniors so that they could go to the Community College of Vermont and get either a certificate or an associate's degree, means tested, last dollar, so making it as easy on the state's coffers as possible. The other thing that I would point out is it is not at all my intention to lean on the ed fund. So what this would do is we have a tax and regulate bill that the Senate has passed 3 times. It's in the House now. There's a kind of what looks to me like a final negotiation going on about that. In the event that we pass that bill, this tuition assistance program draws on that stream of money. It goes into a dedicated fund for that. Out of that same dedicated fund, the largest version of this idea would also encompass substance abuse prevention education, which would flow to your districts, and after-school program money, with the idea that these would mitigate against young people potentially running afoul of cannabis before they're of legal age. So that, by and large, that won't affect you, and wouldn't, even if it passes, wouldn't affect you for a while, a couple of years. But we're gonna spend a good deal of time on that. The thing that, that you will hear about, and that I wanna be really upfront about, is the weighting study. So the weighting formula for equalized pupils. And that's something that has been in statute and has not been updated since before Act 60. So the legislature 3 years ago, I want to say, put it in statute that we wanted a weighting study performed by AOE. Then Secretary Rebecca Holcomb refused to do it in plain language because she said it would be too expensive and she didn't have the money. So we went back and forth, back and forth. We provided the money, $250,000. A study group at UVM spent a year putting this report together. They just issued it, and I'll give you a sense of it. So I know there are people here from very rural districts. What the report says confirms something that you've known for a long time, which is it's more expensive to educate kids the fewer people you have per square mile. So they empirically demonstrate that. So what they want to do that is groundbreaking, they want to add a weight to the equalized pupil formula for population density. So if you are from Essex or Orleans, you would be the big winners in that addition. But if you're from Addison, if you're from Caledonia or Lamoille, by and large, that would help your weighting substantially. Now, at the same time, they examined the weights that we already have. So we have weights currently for whether kids are in their early years or whether they're in high school. We have poverty and English language learner weights. They find the secondary school one to be more or less okay. So I think there's a slight change. But they find that the weight for poverty is significantly underweighted, as is the weight for English language learners, which mostly affects Chittenden County in the area of the refugee resettlement program, Burlington and Winooski. So all a way of saying what this study recommends, and it gives simulations for different sets of policy objectives. But basically what it does is it shows in these simulations what would happen to your district if you're a rural district, if you have a lot of poverty, if you have English language learners, if you have a lot of high school kids, or all of those things at once. They ran simulations for all of the existing districts. So those are available on the websites of the House and the Senate Ed Committee. So I don't want to, definitely don't want to hide that. So everybody will immediately go and check their own district and form an opinion based on those simulated weights. I would just ask one thing as a personal favor to me, and that is before you do that, I would just want you to bring to mind that we're all part of a system, an educational system. So what the study found is that we are currently inequitable in how we fund education, even though Act 60 and Act 68, the Picus report found we were doing pretty well. What we haven't done is adequately. Oops, who was that?
It's just when people pop in and out of the conference call.
What we haven't done is fine-tune the weights in a way that matches up with the data that these people have produced. So if you're from a rural district and you've been making ends meet over the years, that's wrong. And the report makes it clear that you should get a higher weight for what you're doing because it's more expensive in terms of transportation, economies of scale, all of those things, not having a lot of students, etc. Similarly, the refugee resettlement program in Burlington and Winooski gets very, very little state aid and gets very little federal aid. So a great deal of that expense is borne by taxpayers. Then you have some districts like Winooski that has very high poverty rates and very high English language learner rates. And just to give you one example that's stuck in my mind, under this new formula, under one simulation that seemed like the one that the authors were potentially recommending, Albany, Vermont, is anybody here from the district that includes Albany? Albany, Vermont and Winooski, Vermont, both, their weightings both increase exactly the same, just about. So I think that's groundbreaking because people from rural districts have never seen that sort of help.
May I comment, Mr. Chair?
You may, just one second, because I neglected, in addition to all the people that braved the weather to get here tonight, we've also got some folks on the phone.
Oh, okay.
And when Amy popped in and out, that reminded me that I failed to acknowledge that. So we had Amy McMullen from Windsor, Kim Gleason from Chittenden, and Heather Gania from Caledonia, South Essex as well. Don, go ahead.
On this last issue,
Yeah.
I want to commend you for making a focal point. Some of us were at a session at VSBA where she presented data. I would have to say, having listened to people for 50 years, I was most impressed with her.
She's
If there's
very
anything
smart.
I could say is, I hope that the legislators take this as an extremely well-done report and not try to tinker with it and say, well, I don't know if this really is true or whatever. I mean, I still have a copy of the report, but she did a good job presenting those questions. But, you know, Act 46 was fairly profound, but I think this is even more profound.
Mm-hmm.
So, congratulations. Don't foul it up.
Yeah, and in fact, I had that talk with my committee today. One of the things that Professor Colby pointed out was that the weights that are in statute now were not empirically derived. They were people, you know, like Don and I, sitting around a table saying, what do you think? 20, 25, 0.25, 0.30?
I remember those discussions.
Yeah, and you know, that's how a lot of laws get made, and maybe there's no other way in the general course of things to do it. In this case, we paid the money and got good value.
Excellent.
And so you can't pop out one number and cut it in half because you screw up the whole system of
The dominoes will all fall if you don't stick with it.
exactly, so.
Thank you.
But the last thing I'll say, and then I'll listen to what you have to say, is that's gonna be controversial, because once the simulations are available and people get looking, opinions will harden. So be that as it may, I'm happy always to have testimony from people. So if as we go through, that's something that catches your eye and you're interested in, you want to appear, just contact my my committee assistant, Jeannie Lowell, and tell her you'd like to testify. I'll tell her that VSBA members may call her. She'll just schedule you for the next time we're taking up the waiting study, so that you don't have to, try to schedule together whenever it's convenient for you. If you're passionate about it, come and talk to us, and we'll try to work it out and see if we can pass the bill and see if the House will go along.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, because I think, if you look around the table, we've got some pretty broad representation
Yeah.
here. Not just geographically, but I think of opinions as well, too.
Yeah.
We would really welcome the ability, I hope you see us as a resource.
Absolutely.
And you feel free to reach out and leverage that whenever you see fit.
And I know you have good representation now, but I just want to say a word about Nicole. I'm going to miss her a lot. I don't know if I tried to conceal it, but she often gave me solutions to problems that were intractable. I couldn't find a way out, and she would often come up with something that worked. I'm thinking of what we ultimately did on independent schools and special ed. She and Patty Comline together came to me with a solution, and we latched onto it. So I think you've lost somebody who was really helpful to you in the State House, but I know you've hooked in some new people. So
We have utmost confidence in Sue.
Yeah.
She's
Elizabeth Fitzgerald.
going to do a great job. Mark, do you have a question?
Yeah, Phil, I don't want to beat the rural drum, but Act 173, as you probably know, the impact of one or two children coming in that might exceed even the extraordinary, we're just concerned about how that funding's going to work when it impacts our budget so heavily in small districts again, not unlike this weighting issue that we see from that study. Something to keep in mind on 173.
absolutely, and I should have mentioned, we have a parallel discussion going, which could become one discussion. So the weighting study report suggests a couple ways, because we threw that into their charge. It suggests a couple of ways to deal with the problem of a census grant and a district that gets a spike in special needs cases, and you've consumed your grant. What do you do? So we had tabled the question of whether to create a supplementary grant, like a circuit breaker that would kick in the event that you exhausted your census grant and then you get to this level, money kicks in. We already have the extraordinary reimbursement, but this would be a different, not that high a level. It would just be for aggregate spending. So what Professor Colby did in the report is one of the simulations uses poverty and English language learners as a proxy for special needs, because they found in their research that there was a significant overlap. So one of the things that they simulated, but that they are not recommending, as I understand it, is just adding that into the weight for those two things. The reason I don't like that is I think it kind of muddies the waters around what we're trying to do with those weights, and it feels less transparent to me somehow. So Professor Colby didn't really recommend that option. She recommends a categorical grant that we would create in addition to the supplementary grant, with the caveat that she thinks we should wait until we understand more about how the census grant is working. So we're gonna have discussions in my committee, but one way or the other, I'm determined to create exactly what you're talking about, which is, you know, a break glass in case of emergency funding method, so that you don't have, you know, we had Buell's Gore originally in my district. Literally, if you had one special needs kid move into Buell's Gore, they only had about 15 families in Buell's Gore. So if you had one special needs kid, you could theoretically raise everybody's taxes by $1,000 a year. And people were worried about it. Now they don't have to worry about it because of Act 46. But yes, I hear you, and we're on it. The question is just how we'll address it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Any other questions for the? Yeah.
You talked about a program to promote college, state college system's expensive. So that would address college, accessibility for college bound. Is there a consideration, or should there be a consideration for people that want additional trades?
This includes certificates.
So it's post-secondary then?
It's post-secondary. It's all delivered through CCV. So whatever you can get at CCV, you could use this benefit to pay for. And it would be full or part-time. You have to fill out the FAFSA in order to access it. So the idea is to bring more federal money that we're leaving on the table, bring that more into the state. You know, I went with Jeb Spalding to Northern Vermont University, went to the Johnson campus, went to the Linden campus. Lovely campuses, but perennially under-attended, and they're at their wits' end trying to figure out how to get more students onto their campus. So the idea here is you make it much easier for people to go from high school into CCV. Maybe they get a certificate or an associate's and they stop, but a significant number of them will go on for a more advanced degree with the credits that they rack up at CCV, and those people theoretically go into the state college system probably disproportionately. So I think Jeb would view it as a win, second only to direct financial support for increased support for his state college campuses.
Is there a way to find, well, your weekly calendar, that is something, just what Kevin has said, that I'm very interested in, having worked on when Governor Douglas proposed the next generation.
Yeah.
Some of the things we did there, and I think the concept is good, but I don't want to take your time tonight, but I think there's some ideas that might come out of this corner of the room.
Okay, absolutely. So I want to make sure, I feel like I talk too much. I want to know what, other than don't do anything, which I hear loud and clear, what could I do to help you? We have vehicles that we can convert into pretty much any shape, so it's not that we couldn't draft legislation on pretty much anything now. What would help? What would alleviate whatever problems you have?
I said, Mark Nielsen, Lemoyle North. Because of my background, I'm employed by the federal government. You go into usajobs.gov, and they started asking about how many foreign languages do you know. Are we looking at that at all at the State House? I mean, Johnson Elementary right now has Spanish.
Yep.
My granddaughter's taking it. I'm actually learning Spanish from there, but in other pieces of my job as well. We talk about having, like the Winooski piece, learning English. Is there a flip side of that, where statewide you can have, one of my goals on a school board
Yeah.
is to have folks that graduate from Memorial be able to compete on a world level. And one of those pieces is a foreign language.
I agree with you. So I must have talked 5 times this week about this issue, which I think is a slightly larger issue than the foreign language. It's really, do we mandate curriculum? This week, I had someone approach me wanting to mandate financial literacy, another person wanting to mandate civics, another person wanting to mandate ethnic studies. So in all of those cases, I have offered them voluntary versions of their bills, assuming that we can pass it out of committee, with potentially incentives. So to go to what you're saying, I think you're exactly right. We're a connected world, so, you know, anything we can do to make people savvy outside the bounds of the US, or even within the bounds of the US where Spanish is spoken or French is spoken, I think does us proud. The question is how to have the state have a role in that. I would personally oppose mandating the instruction of foreign language, because I know when I was on a school board, I did a couple of terms in Burlington, and there were times when I hated to do it, but we cut out the second year of a foreign language, and then hopefully later we get the money and we restore it. But to take away the ability to offer or not offer, I wouldn't want to do. But I could see, you know, is there a way, again, for districts that are disadvantaged in terms of where they're positioned, you know, in terms of geography, is there a way to provide low-cost or no-cost incentive distance learning so that you could offer 3 years of a foreign language at no cost to the district? It's just it would be via satellite or via the internet. I thought I saw a hand over here. No? I'm a teacher, so I'm very sensitive to hand movements. I don't know if that helps. But
Nope, that's fine, thanks.
okay. And, you know, so that's an example. I talked about calling Jeannie Lowe and just setting up time to come talk to the committee. Joe McNeil mentioned this, but it's a standing offer. If you have language for a bill developed by your attorney or by you personally, and you want to just send it to me or come to the State House and show it to me, that's the easiest way to get what you want, because we're all lazy like everybody else. So if I have to go through the process of drafting it, it happens less frequently than if somebody hands me something and I read it and I say, that makes sense. We have a miscellaneous bill as a vehicle. I can hand it to the attorney, it goes into the bill, and it takes out about 5 steps. So not everybody has the ability to have a lawyer do that for them, or somebody who's skilled in that sort of thing, but if you do, feel free.
I know one of the things that covers a lot of the areas is the Agency of Education's capacity to do their job.
Yeah.
Anything on the radar related to that?
Yeah, so Secretary French is coming in this coming week, and we've asked him to bring an org chart from his first day in office and an org chart now. The reason for that is when we had him in for his interview to be endorsed by the Senate, we spent the entire time talking about understaffing at AOE and the burdens that transfers to districts, all the data that districts need to come up with, the assistance they don't get from AOE, and take something like Act 173. The whole act is built on the idea that we can move to a census grant because we're going to change the culture of delivery of special ed at school. The only way you can do that is through professional development and consulting, and so we had that in the bill, right? It didn't happen. We passed the bill, a year went by, we heard from Nicole and many other people on the ground that there was very little of this cultural shift going on, in part because everybody at the agency who did special ed retired or left. So right at the moment when they had a historic need for expertise in special ed, they were woefully understaffed, and frankly, the secretary was not moving with the urgency that he should have been. So we delayed implementation by a year, which the secretary then opposed and said that we were costing the state 30 million in potential savings under the census grant model. Now, all I can say about that is those savings are built on the idea that you're going to change how we deliver special ed. If we haven't helped districts by providing them with the expertise free of charge, then I don't see how that happens. So they have redoubled their efforts theoretically after that delay. But when he comes in, as I say, we're going to look at that current org chart. And I spoke last year with the governor right at the end of the session about it. He promised to talk with the secretary. They said they had hires in the pipeline, so maybe we're on an upswing that I haven't seen yet.
Any other questions? Oh, Colleen, go ahead.
Colleen McKinnon, Chittenden, Grand Isle. Your concept about drawing on the Tennessee study and figuring out how to get more students into post-secondary ed, I'm wondering if you might consider how to capture adults who had some higher ed education or post-secondary training and left the system, but get them back in the system.
Yeah, we've had that discussion. I should say, we talked about this brainstorming all of last year with the stated intention of not writing a bill last year. We just wanted to know where we were as a committee, do some research, rough out some ideas. So we talked a lot about who should be brought in on this. How many hours should they have to go? In other words, if somebody can only go 5 hours a week, should they be able to access it? Should they have to go part-time as half-time or full-time? Should somebody who has, half the credits they need for a BA, but they stopped out 25 years ago, should they be able to come back? So those discussions are ongoing. I will say we're tending to err on the side of making things more streamlined and less expensive. So we're trying to keep the cost down to the bare minimum. So if we open it up, if we open the cohort up to all the adults who might potentially take advantage of it, it really substantially increases.
Yeah.
With that said, I'm wondering if we couldn't have a way that if people are really close to finishing.
And it's hard because it's a population that falls
Yeah.
outside of our domain. I mean, we're not really responsible as board members for that population, and that at the same time, it's a
Yeah.
desperate need for the state to have highly skilled, highly educated people stay.
But I think you're right, but I do have to remind myself, we sometimes have adults that come back to high school, and we're required to educate them. And when I first learned that, it blew my mind. It seemed counterintuitive, even not smart. But the more I've thought about it over the years, I think it's one of the best values Vermont has, is we don't stop caring about you if you're 25 or 35 and you realize you need a high school degree. But college is another story. So I know you have to eat.
Yeah, we do. So maybe one final question. I know, so you heard from the bargaining commission employer side
Yeah.
today, and setting aside how the decision was arrived at, I think one of the things that's a big concern to a lot of folks around the table here is the decision does have quite a significant monetary impact on budgets.
Yes.
Not that there's anything you can do about it now, but I think a lot of boards across the state are gonna be struggling to figure out how to deal with that.
Yeah. No, I understood the minute VHI talked about what the increases in the premiums were gonna be, that on down the road, there were gonna be big increases this year. Regardless of which last best offer had gotten chosen, it was gonna be a significant impact. Less, obviously, if it had been the employer offer taken. So I talked with Joe today in front of the committee about, he was saying the statute could be rewritten to make it clear that the intention was to hold down costs. Honestly, my anxiety about that is, so it's collective bargaining. The legislature, I try to think of as an honest broker. I hope Joe stressed that we developed Act 11, the statewide healthcare bargaining language, with Nicole here, NEA here, AFSCME here, and everybody had to agree to everything. And when we were done with that language, I asked everybody to hold up their hand and say that they agreed with the structure we had created, which we got, unanimous buy-in. That helped a lot to pass that piece of legislation. I want to do the same thing with the changes that we make. So in other words, it's no surprise to you, NEA has been coming to me for changes for a year now. They wanted to change things during the process. I said, no, we're not making any changes until we've gone a full cycle. Now that we've gone a full cycle, I want as much as possible to make sure that both sides are still in agreement on the changes we make. I did leave the possibility that we might, in one or two cases, make changes that one side wanted and not the other. My problem with saying that the intent of the legislation is to hold costs down is that, to me, it seems to put a thumb on the scale for an arbitrator who might be looking at the last two offers. Because if he could say to himself or herself, well, the whole purpose of this is to choose the plan that's going to save taxpayers the most money, then it might wind up being a fait accompli, which is not what collective bargaining is supposed to produce. So having been on a school board, having gone through union negotiations once in those 4 years, I will say that it's always a hit to your budget. You always have to go to your people and explain why costs are going up. And I think that's part and parcel of the system of unionization, number one, but also healthcare in America. You know, it's not just us in this room who are having this conversation. It's every single select board, every municipal government, every big corporation. Everybody's looking at healthcare costs that go like this. We're having a presidential election right now. The biggest issue is healthcare. So we're all working on it. That's all I can say.
Thank you. Thank you for
Yeah.
taking the time.
Thank you all.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
You're first in line for dinner.
I wish. I actually have to go to my Democratic caucus now. But
Can we make you a plate to take with you?
thank you, no. But I understand that you have a good chef now, so the next time around I will.
Oh.
Please. I am sorry, I would have cut it off earlier if we had known that we were gonna cheat
Well,
you out of a dinner.
No, it started at 6. I just told them I had to come here first. So.
Maybe after the crossover, or maybe in April, or when things are really getting exciting in March for town meeting, we could give them a free dinner if we wanted to come in.
You just come for dinner.
Just come for dinner.
You don't even have to take any questions. You just come and eat.
It doesn't work like that. It'll be the person sitting next to me. Anyway,
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Good to see you.
Yeah, thank you.
Good to see you.
Take care.
Thanks again, Joe. Yeah.
All right, board, it's time to eat. Let's get some dinner.
I'm chewing on my cookie,
Right
I'm
up.
sorry.
So Sue has told me that the cookies are really good. If you hadn't had one yet, go get one. Any ones that are left over, I will put in my pocket on the way out.
So Sandra is gonna give a little legislative update on what's happened in the past 2 days.
All right, awesome.
So in addition to what you heard already tonight, the committees have already heard about Act 66, the lead testing. They wanted an update on how many schools and childcare programs have done the lead testing and where we're at. So they're in the process of collecting information on that. They're very interested in hearing feedback from the field around proficiency-based learning and grading, what's working, what's challenging about it, what we need to do next, potentially. There has been a lot of discussion around AOE capacity. And I'll link in my first report the testimony that Dan French did, that he looked at organizational charts and talked a little bit about that, but noted many vacancies at the Agency of Education at this point. There is concern about the NAEP scores that recently came out and an emphasis on literacy. There are a couple of bills drafted, being discussed right now, but Representative Webb talked about literacy being highlighted in the DMG report, which then fed to 173, so it all links together. And so she has been asking a lot about literacy. And interestingly, Dan French mentioned that the literacy specialist position is a vacant position in the AOE right now. So what I couldn't find, and I'm still searching, is to see if there's a mathematics position also open. I'm curious about that. School construction, there has been conversation about how many schools were built during the industrial age, and that many of them need modifications to be brought forward to today's technology and learning environments. And tax structure. I listened to a presentation today about tax structure and how the majority of our revenue feeding the ed fund is on income, and we have an aging population in Vermont. And so what does that mean? What are some potential ways to offset that?
Wow, that's a red
There's-
flag, potentially. Like, they're not looking at changing.
The Tax Structure Commission, it is performing analysis of the entire tax structure of the state. And they have been working since last spring. I believe they'll be working through until next winter. So, but they're due to put out a report about education funding soon, I think. So, yes. Nicole last summer testified in front of the Tax Structure Commission.
Just looking real quick to see, Kate Webb did mention Act 166, as you heard Senator Baruth mention tonight. So there will be some conversation about how to, she's hoping, just tweak the law a little bit to remove some of the challenges that are currently in there. And then other things around unified charts of accounts, statewide longitudinal data systems, you know, these are conversations, not acts, but interest in all of those pieces that affect all of us. And State Board of Education potential elimination.
Don't tell Kim.
She might,
So busy.
she might be
Very
writing
busy.
that on.
I think overall, maybe they're also just looking at the role of the State Board, and I think the State Board itself is undertaking some of that work.
Any questions?
Yeah, that's true. I did hear that.
Nice. Any questions from board members on any of the legislative updates? On what, day 2, day 3?
Day two,
Two.
yes.
Now, just kind of curious on Act 160, you know, pre-K, is there really their only focus on the dual administration, or are they actually looking at, you know, the 10 hours and whether 10 hours is right?
Kate Webb mentioned she has asked for data on the cost of potentially increasing the hours.
Are they looking at the role or the relationship of the center-based and the schools, and the whole idea of attendance being more of children of parents of means? I mean, that's pretty complicated, but, I mean, I heard a couple of years ago that some of the groups were really upset that the people really utilizing that could afford to pay, and that the goal to help families who didn't have a suitable income to get their children into school, is that a variable that's still on the table?
I haven't heard any conversation
Good,
about that.
good.
Yeah. Have you?
Not yet.
All right. Any other questions?
I don't know where this should be pointed, but one of the resolutions asked, or brought up, that we need to collect data on Act 46 and what it's done to the state, because that was part of the legislation, and I didn't know if that's legislature related, or if that's AOE.
There are reports that are given to the legislature by the agency, so that may be included in one of those reports that's probably gonna be given in the next couple of weeks. There's several reports being given by the agency.
Okay, I'll keep my ears open.
I wanted to follow up on the pre-K because it's something that we are wrestling with in our area. David Chandler from the Bennington region. And on the one side, you're talking about trying to separate between AOE and DHS, and that makes sense. But the other issue that we're running into, that maybe a lot of areas don't have, is the difference between public and private providers. And how do we do that? Because if we're allocating a certain amount of money for each of the hours, that works for the public school because we can control that, and we can keep the costs down, but the private costs tend to be 1.5 to 2 times per hour more than what the public is. So how are we gonna figure out ways to coordinate those two, since we're now allowed to open up a public opportunity, even though we can run it more efficiently, we can't open it if there's access to space available provided by private sectors that are qualified and everything. And we don't want to throw people out of business anyway. So that's where we could use some help. We're trying to form a committee of interested and concerned board members and parents. So if it's okay, I will steer them your way.
That'd be great, thank you.
Okay.
Anything else on the legislative updates?
We hope you enjoyed hearing from Senator Baruch.
Oh.
Was there somebody on the phone?
I did have a question. I'm remembering back, it was more than a year ago now, I think, that we heard from the VSBA, VSBA, and our group do some strategic thinking around cost savings, and specifically I recall there to be some energy around mandatory or whatever, like instead of pre-K being 3 and 4, being full day for 4-year-olds, and then it may be that, there's 10 hours for 3-year-olds, or I can't remember precisely how that went, and maybe somebody else can remember more detail of the conversation, but I remember there being some cohesion around that idea, and I didn't know if that had been looked at, considered. It was in the intent of addressing that equity issue.
Yeah, I thought wasn't that proposal that essentially split 4s and 3s and make 4s be agency of education, 3s be human services. Which that was a proposal that was going out with the VSBA signed up.
Yes, and there was a bill last year that didn't make it through.
Didn't the Principals Association promote that?
Yes, the
That came out of
VPA is promoting that.
Principals Association.
Yep.
So that's still out there?
Yes.
Did it get studied in the study at all? That, I don't know if there's other states that do, full day 4 or whatever. Was that all part of the body of work that came out of the study?
I don't remember if that's in the study. I can check that. Do you, Sandra?
There was information about how different states do, how many different states include 3-year-olds, is there the right amount of dosage, but it was pretty inconclusive.
Did you hear that, Kim?
I think I got it. I'm not sure whether I fully got it. It sounds like it wasn't fully explored, but there might have been something ancillary in it.
But, as
Or did I miss that?
just to, kind of stretching the old memory back again, I seem to also remember the study that came out. One of the reasons we came up with a lot of comments was because we didn't find the study to be all that helpful.
Right, right.
So I thought we didn't really like a lot of the conclusions, which is why I thought it was, like VSA, VSBA, BPA, the business, special educators, et cetera, everybody's signing on to an alternate.
Yes.
Which that would be really interesting to see where that stands in people's minds now.
I'll try to pull up that document and we could put it on the agenda for the next meeting if you like.
May I? That is great, or even if you just check in and it's no longer an issue or whatever, and it's something that, VPA is not, just some status update on what has been thought to be strategically well-positioned towards equity and.
It's definitely something that VPA is still pushing for.
And it is probably good to hear a little bit more about that in case we're asked where we stand on it. Thank you.
Yep.
I was gonna add, being one of those private preschool people, the fact that my child care center is a licensed center in the state of Vermont, and has been for 22 years. And we were one of the very first ones that they came to when they said, would you be interested in doing this, when the grant first came out to do the private preschool. It has worked wonderfully with us. We are partnered with 5 different unions, and every one of them is done differently. But it works really, really well for us, and I know that it's helped our district in Hartford, because they didn't have the facilities, the space, nor the teachers to bring in the number of kids that needed to have the preschool to work. And we start with the 3-year-olds. That's part of our program. So I'm wholeheartedly for it. I think it's a wonderful program, and I think it's especially helped our parents who've not been able to not take their preschooler till 8 or 8:30, and then 2 hours later have to get off work, go pick their child up, find a daycare that can take a child half day, and it's worked really well for our parents that are in our area. So just a throw in.
How well utilized is it? Just a quick question, just out of.
We have a waiting list that's year long.
So you're not.
We have 20 kids
You're not
in the
providing.
preschool.
So as a percentage of the people that want to access it, how many are you providing to? If you have a waiting list, you're not providing the service to everybody.
Oh, no, because of the size.
Right,
Our state
I'm just
waiting-
asking how many get it, how many don't?
I'm still not quite, how many kids?
How many kids do you have on your waiting list?
Oh, about 15 right now.
So you,
And we're just one of 3 in our area that.
so you're not really providing universal pre-K, isn't right?
We can't, we have
Okay.
no,
No,
we're in the same
It's not a
situation.
comment
Oh, yeah,
on
I
your-
know,
on your-
no.
I'm
It's-
just, yeah,
We're in the
okay.
same situation as the public school. We just don't have enough space to bring in that many more kids.
Mhm.
We would if we could.
Mhm. Yeah.
We'd be happy to, but we just can't
Yeah.
because of the space.
No, I get it.
Do we want to move on to the waiting study?
Yes, I can just give a brief update on that. The waiting study was required through Act 173, and everybody knows what Act 173 is at this point. The census-based funding group had a presentation about the waiting study on Monday. And then today, there was a joint hearing with the House Ed and House Ways and Means committees, so that they could hear from the authors of the study. And they were lucky enough to have Tammy Colby and another professor, he's from Rutgers, I don't remember his name, but he drove up from New Jersey to be at the hearing today. So they were able to hear from 2 people that authored the study. And it's definitely a very comprehensive piece of work. It's going to take, I think, everyone, including the legislature and the advisory group, a while to fully understand it. I've read through it fully once, and I've read the executive summary twice, and I've now heard 2 presentations on it, and so I'm finally starting to feel like I understand it. So I'm thinking, I don't know if there's interest if you think there's interest from school board members, we could certainly try to see if we could possibly offer a webinar on the
It's
waiting
already
study.
scheduled.
Okay, great.
That's on the, I don't have the schedule in front of me, so I don't remember exactly what month. I'm gonna say maybe April.
Wonderful. So
April
that's
or
good.
May.
Okay. So we'll be having a webinar on the waiting study, and I think it would be, everybody should try to listen to it if you can, attend the webinar, because it's going to be very interesting to see what the legislature does with it. One of the main things that I took away from the presentation today was that, and Senator Ruth said it as well, that if they start to tinker with it, it's not gonna work, because it's very much based on research and empirical evidence, and if they start to change it, the purpose won't be achieved.
Do you have any indication that they are gonna actually enact the numbers that are discussed in the waiting study? Did you get any feedback that, oh wow, this is something we really should do?
Well, I think that they are at the preliminary phases, so I really can't, I did not get an indication that it's gonna happen quickly.
Okay.
Colleen McKinnon, in Grand Isle. Study methodology, I read through it too, and, I think it's something that we can fully endorse. They seem to have done a really good job, and some of us saw a presentation at VSBA annual meeting as well. I'm representing a region of the state that is going to have a big impact with the numbers going up for us. And so I imagine that, and there are concerns on both sides, of course. The questions that will come from my direction will probably be about implementation timelines and looking for something that's reasonable over time. I don't think anyone can argue with the methodology and the messages that come behind that. And I imagine that legislators will probably take some action related to it, and then the concern for those districts on either side would be implementation timeline.
Thank you.
Don?
On this matter, and I think he alluded to it, I think this whole boondoggle with the special ed census model and everything, I think it's going to maybe expedite some of the changes that the weighting system wants to do. Because I think I heard him say, and somewhere else I heard, to handle them separately is a mistake. Because if you do the special ed without looking at the weighting, or if you do the weighting without doing the census model, I think you're just gonna dig a big hole for yourself. Because I think that it's larger than either one of them separately. So if the special ed, if people can push on the special ed with the agency or whatever, I think that's going to take and encourage the legislature to move the weighting study faster than they might normally do. I don't know about what you people hear in your schools, but I hear people that they're scared to death of the special ed census model. They really think that it's a way to move costs to the local school districts. And I don't know if other people feel that way, so. I hope they move the weighting study along.
Although that would seemingly go against no big changes, like just let us rest on, was the message I thought you sent.
No, it's already started. I want no big changes that aren't in it. This one's already $250,000 later.
Yeah, I think it's the implementation end of things that are gonna.
Oh, it's not gonna be implemented tomorrow, but I think there needs to be a schedule of implementation. If you don't come up with a schedule of implementation, whether it be 3 years or 5 years or whatever, you never get off the dime.
Anything else on that?
No.
Topic, any other questions from board members on that one? No. Our strategic plan monitoring report.
Yes.
In the packet.
We're happy to provide it to you. So the format is very similar to what you have seen has the different goal areas, the member engagement goal that you added to the strategic plan, education leadership, and the support for good governance, education equity, labor relations and internal management. And the indicators and the strategies are from the strategic plan. The outcomes are what the staff has been working on. So I don't, for the newer people, we don't usually necessarily go through this in great detail, but happy to answer any questions that you have. And I know there was something that Susan wanted to let you know about.
A couple of things. First of all, if you haven't already, I encourage you to get your Darn Tough socks, because unlike last year, this coupon really does expire at the end of January. And second of all, thank you to those of you who have volunteered to create a podcast episode. They are going live in
January 20th.
January 20th, which is a week.
The first one will be.
Right, which I believe is David.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, really?
Yes.
So, we have a total of 5 recorded, which takes us through May. And I have a little bit of an ask for you as VSBA board members, not so much that you all do podcast episodes, though I'm very happy to entertain that. But if you would please go back to your boards and your regions and drum up some enthusiasm for school boards to tell, school board members to tell us their story about their school board experience. I'm happy to review with you what the 3 questions are, but they're really easy. Tell us about how you got involved in school board, something that you've done that you're proud of, and
A challenge. Challenge.
was it and about a challenge and how that resolved. So it's all easy stuff. It's all from, you know, narrative. And the idea of it is just to have school board members be able to communicate with other school board members. So I've been a little lax during the holiday season of getting more volunteers, but I will travel to meet up with people, or we can record them over the phone, and it's a half an hour out of their lives. Thank you.
And it's fun.
Well, it is if you like me.
That helps.
I could, my thought came to mind, I can sweeten the pot a little bit. I would recommend that maybe at the annual meeting in October.
Well, that's where I got what I got.
No, here's my idea. Check this out, right? So I'm gonna offer a free beer, and we're gonna have like this Emmys thing, right? So whatever board member like has the best podcast through a vote of other board members, I'll buy them a free beer.
That's huge.
That's it? What a
It's
deal.
huge. We're trying to generate, it's like,
I like it, I like it.
you're automatically in the running.
I get it, I'm ready.
All right, cool. And my socks arrived today.
Oh,
I haven't seen them yet,
Are you
but
wearing them?
I got the notice, no, I got the notice in the
I'm wearing
mail,
mine.
but they arrived today, so
Excellent.
totally awesome. Yeah, so for folks that are new, this is, I find this an awesome way to just keep track of what's going on in the organization on a monthly basis. And it also makes sure that the stuff in the outcomes column matches the stuff that we said we were gonna do. So I think that this has been a really helpful tool, I thought, that I even tried to push down into my own local district.
Oh, excellent. Did you do it?
Somewhat. Moving on then to our non-member registration fee for negotiations workshop. Approval of advisory opinion of executive committee. So, full board. We had a need, we had a bunch of, I shouldn't say a bunch, a few districts that were signing up for the negotiations workshops that were actually not dues-paying members of the VSBA. And so we were like, well, how are we gonna handle this? Because we're offering these workshops for free. We thought that we needed to sort of make a decision in the near-term time frame. And so we got the executive committee together to discuss the matter and came up with the decision that I think is in the packet. You'll see the email that's in there. Now, per our bylaws though, right, or our standard operating procedure or
Policy, I believe it is.
policy. This was merely an advisory opinion that our administration has been working on, but I'd like to bring it to the full board tonight to see if the full board is in agreement with what the executive committee decided. And if you are, one of the simplest ways to do it would be just to make a motion to adopt the decision made by the executive committee regarding payment for these non-member districts for the negotiations. Actually, it applies to all VSBA-sponsored events, yes, the ones that we would.
The
Or is this just
decision
the
that you made was
negotiations?
just on the negotiations
Okay,
workshops.
sorry.
Yes.
So yes, then let's have it be particular, it's just the negotiations workshops. If somebody would be so inclined to make a motion, and then if we got a second, then we could discuss it.
Make the motion.
Okay.
Okay, can you say your name and your district?
Kevin, Amy, Orleans North representative.
Thank you.
Do we have a second?
George Gondy, Rutland, all second.
Any discussion?
Do we have a sense of any feedback, any kind of, whether there'll be fallout from this? Will this trigger, I just was wondering if we have any sense of what the reaction is through the grapevine.
Well, we do know, this arose not only with a couple of public non-member districts, but also with some independent schools that wanted to participate. And we've let them know that they're welcome to participate at the fee that was set by the executive committee. And I believe we've heard back from most of them. There were 3, and we've heard back from 2 of them that they wanted to pay that fee and participate.
Thank you.
And the other one we haven't heard back from negatively, we just haven't heard back from them.
And maybe another point to make is, so everybody understands, you know, a lot of this falls under the VSBA VSBA funding arrangement, you know, are providing services like this. So, you know, while it's part of our budget, you know, it's really VSBA money comes in, and this is one of the things that it's, you know, pointed to. So we did actually contact, you know, VSBA and make sure that they were, you know, they clearly had an interest in having people be informed, but at the same time, they, you know, they thought they were comfortable with this approach.
Yes.
Any other questions or comments related to this? All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
All right, motion passes. Thank you, board. Next up is regional meetings. And if you will recall, at the last meeting, we voted on a proposal to change the timing of the regional meetings.
Yes. Yes, and there were some concerns that were raised at the meeting and heard from a few veteran board members as well about making that change too quickly. And also the length of time that would occur between someone being elected as a regional representative and them beginning their service. So we think that it would probably be best to wait and implement this in the spring of 2021 rather than in the spring of 2020. So we wanted to bring it back to the board's attention because originally we had thought that it would, you know, that it could be done this spring.
So would we be changing our bylaws at our annual meeting in October?
If there is any need for any change in bylaws, that we would have the time to do that, yes.
Because I thought Neil indicated, and I think many of the people knew around the table, that you don't take office until after the annual meeting if you're a new representative, right?
Right.
Even though you're elected at a spring or fall meeting.
Right.
So I would think that we might want to change that date. Because to recruit somebody in March go to an April or May meeting to get elected and then say, see you in October, November.
Right. That would be something that we could look at the bylaws, and the effect, and any possible changes that we would need to make.
We've got time to do that.
Right,
Good.
that would give time to do that. And it also would take into consideration the fact that the organization, newer people might not know this, but the organization is moving to a different fiscal year.
And different regions.
And different regions as well, yes. And so we're gonna be moving to a fiscal year that coincides with what schools do, changing from September 1 to July 1.
Yeah, so I've got two thoughts on this one. One is the idea that tonight maybe we just say, just make a motion to keep things the way that they currently are. And when I say currently, I mean keep the elections at the regional meetings in the fall. And then take this up again, either at the annual meeting, whether the annual meeting addresses I don't know that the annual meeting needs to address the time frame for the regional meetings, but it might want to address any changes in bylaws that we would need associated with the change in the meetings.
Right.
All that to say that either tonight we can just say, let's rescind what we did last meeting, and then take this up again completely around the annual meeting, or tonight say, no, we want to go with this plan, but just delay it a year.
Well, just as I mentioned, you know, even this, we agreed to do it on a trial basis anyway, last time around, so we would give it a shot. But I like the idea of doing it, it's discussing the annual meeting time.
And we usually have a bylaws committee, so we get the bylaws committee formed and work on any changes that would need to happen.
Yeah, and it's kind of nice to have, you know, let a larger group have have some input into the, you know, it's a pretty significant event of our year, you know.
So if that's the general consensus, I think just a motion to keep the regional meetings in the fall for the upcoming year would be appropriate, and then we'll just take it up again later on.
So moved.
Second?
Lori Childers Addison.
Jim Salzgiver, Bennington, second.
All right.